Hill, and oh man, what a great day we are having here at Common Sense America. It's a very special Monday. Monday, January the 16th is Martin Luther King Day, and I have the privilege and the honor to bring over to the show Donna Jackson. She is a friend, she is a fearless woman of faith, a woman of conviction. And so we're going to bring her over to the show. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, thanks so much for coming over to Common Sense, and thanks for coming back. When this show started back at the end of last year, I paid tribute to you and also Barbara from Harlem and all the women of faith and women of leadership who are on the front lines fighting for our next generation. And you were one of them, and I'm so grateful. I want to get right to it. There are quite a few things that are happening in our culture today, and you charged the hill last week. I love charging the hill. I love shaking it up. I love stirring the pot. I love getting things going. And a couple things that you did last week, you went before the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and you specifically talked to how what the domestic energy will be to our American families and our Black communities. I would love if you could share a little bit about the impact that it made last week for you and what you see coming down the pike, especially as we are remembering Dr. Martin Luther King today.
The one thing that people really need to realize is that the civil rights movement was about giving people economic opportunities, and it was about making sure that people had the right to be able to pursue their dreams. It wasn't about dirty words. And that's what the left would like you to think, that it's about nasty words, but it's not that. Dr. Martin Luther King wanted us to participate in this American experience where we had the opportunity to achieve financial stability, strong Black families, and families that could economically support themselves. But what we see from progressives is the exact opposite of that. Everything this country was built on is based upon affordable energy that is able to support industry. And one of the things that you need to realize is that we created a vibrant, strong Black middle class from industrialized jobs.
Yes.
And they're doing everything they can to destroy it. In many ways, the war on fossil fuel is not only a war on minority communities and low-income families, but it's also ushered in a new green Jim Crow because the effects are exactly the same. That's what I wanted to share with the committee, giving them a realization of really what Black-owned businesses were going through because they struggle in the face of very expensive energy to actually continue to operate. And those jobs are vital. Think about a group of people who have lower educational rates where they're not participating in the keyboard industry. They need to be able to start their own businesses, which again, those industrialized jobs actually create that opportunity for them to support the individuals working in those industries as well. And they also need the opportunity to be able to afford to live in their communities. Everything is heavily impacted by energy. And so when you commit a war on energy, you're basically making sure that it's now not race, but unaffordability that's keeping people more segregated out of the housing market. And the impact is exactly the same as Jim Crow.
So let me ask you something. I heard in one of your interviews last week, and I am going to not do it justice on the perfection of the exact quote, but something you said. You mentioned how the community themselves are already struggling, and then in addition to that, it's like they can't even get their checks, they live from check to check, but they're not even living from paycheck to paycheck now. They are buying. In addition, they are trying to get extra credit to, just get by to that next paycheck. And, if that is happening in our nation's backyard, what are we to do in regards to this whole green energy aspect? I have running across the screen, and I want to put this quote out there. You stated, in so many ways, plentiful and affordable domestic energy is part of the ticket out of poverty and dependence. For example, we see the entrepreneurial spirit of Black communities and many Black-owned small businesses, but those businesses struggle and sometimes fail. So what are we to do as the American people? What are we to do to uplift these communities all across our nation and our nation's backyard? What are we to do as the American people? And speaking to my kitchen table, my friend's kitchen table, the moms, the single dads, the retirees, what are we to do?
Well, first of all, we need to recognize the harms that these energy policies are creating. There's so much talk about how they do all these environmental impact studies,
right,
and how it affects the climate.
right.
But nobody's doing an economic impact study and how it's destroying communities.
Right.
If you looked at the climate change policies, they're more detrimental to the health of minority and low income communities than actually dirty air, because the biggest threat to minority communities is poverty. I was mentioning that a lot of times you hear that middle class families are living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
Low income and minority communities are not living paycheck to paycheck. They're living paycheck to Wednesday or midweek.
Yes.
Or week.
Yes.
And
yes.
then they're having to borrow money from friends, from neighbors, from high interest loan places in order to be able to make it to the next paycheck. So they're actually starting off with negative income before they even get to the next pay period. That's what happened with a lot of sharecroppers back in the day, where they would be working and then they actually owe money for working. Not even meeting their minimum standards of their cost of living expenses.
Right.
They're coming into the hole just by going to work and putting their efforts there.
Right.
And we're in the solution for these climate change activists and progressive is to make energy more unaffordable so we can get further in the hole. Basically, what you have is these green energy policies creating a barrier so that those in the lowest rungs of society can never work themselves out. And they're using, I say there's two ways that we build big government.
Sure.
Poor and the poor. So the more people we have that are dependent on government programs, the bigger we can build the government. But they don't benefit from any of the money allocated for the poor. It's these activists, it's these lawyers, it's these academias that benefit, while the poor just struggle more and more. And so they can never work their way out of poverty. It is important to realize that Martin Luther King was not marching so that people wouldn't use dirty words.
Right.
He marched so we can have economic opportunity and upward mobility. That was the agenda. And what green activists are doing is to make sure that those opportunities don't exist.
So do you think, and is this in your recommendation, do you think that this is just one example of Martin Luther King's dream being undermined by big government?
100%. And it's on purpose. Some people try to convince me that it's unintended. I doubt that.
Oh my goodness. I don't believe that for a second.
For a second. I go to Boston.
Millisecond. Not even, I mean, come on.
When you drive through the one thing that I stress with this committee, I said, listen to this. Drive through the streets of Baltimore, Chicago, Detroit. You'll see 60 years worth of liberal economic policies that don't work. In fact, they destroy communities.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, you're telling me today that this time is going to be different? It's not.
Mm-mm.
The intention is the same. Environmental justice is what you get when elite white liberals create an agenda for Black people that we didn't ask for and tell us to fall in line and do what we're told. And they spend all of their time raking the money out of the community, getting money on behalf of the community and never helping them, because that's the intention. It's not a war on poverty. It's a war for poverty to create more of it.
Where's the money go? Where's the money go?
Oh my God. Do you know that it's going to activists, it's going to academia, and it's going to lawyers, environmental lawyers. Do you know that just in the Inflation Reduction Act, they allocated $60 billion? I want you to understand this. $60 billion is equivalent to the market capitalization of Ford Motor Company worldwide that employs more than 200,000 people. And it is responsible for countless small businesses. And yet, none of that money will actually see the minority communities. That's also equipped. They made a big to do out of the 1921 Tulsa riots.
Right.
That's with $60 billion. If you adjusted it for inflation today, you could actually build 2,000 Black Wall Streets all around the country. That means that basically you would have nobody in poverty.
Right.
The truth of the matter is, the best we'll ever see, maybe, is some retrofittings.
All I see is Corvettes running through my head, but that's all I'll say to that.
But those Corvettes are not even going to minorities.
Exactly.
They're not even, they created economic policies like asset limits. So if you participate in any government program, they have an asset limit. Do you know that for most people, that limit is $2,000 to maybe $3,000? I'm not saying that's what you can have a year in assets. That's what you can have for the entirety in assets. That includes savings. That includes investments. That includes your car, any jewelry, any money you got in your bank account.
Right.
So of course you have more poverty when they created laws that actually force you not to be able to get yourself out. You can't save any money. You have to spend every dollar you have. You can't own any property, which is the gateway into the middle class. You can't even have enough money for an emergency.
Right.
So you have people who are constantly living in survival mode. And they figured out a way to use these climate change policies to create more of this poverty. And they're doing it on the backs of low income and minority households.
And that's not freedom at all. That's not one nation under God. That is not at all.
I say with liberals, slavery is ended, but it's not in their mind. Slavery is still going on, and they control and micromanage the lives of minorities by creating more of these big governments, because if they have a lot of regulations, then they have control over you. Financial freedom means freedom.
Yes.
Because you can determine your own fate. But as long as you have to depend on the government for what you need, then they determine what behavior you're allowed and what behavior you're not allowed.
Sounds very socialism, like socialism.
It's socialism on steroids.
Yeah.
I mean, they created this experiment with the minority communities, and now they're filtering it out to everyone. That's what they did. They figured out it worked, and then they blackmail the rest of Americans by putting justice, so that people are so afraid to question what they're doing that they don't pay attention to the wrongs and ill and destruction they're causing. And that was one of the things I brought out to the committee members.
Yeah.
I mean, they were really surprised to realize that, we weren't asking for environmental justice.
Right.
That the biggest threat to us is not dirty air, it's poverty. That we were living on so little, and they're making sure that we live on even less. They don't want us to have disposable income. They don't want us to save. They don't want us to own property, because then you can increase the size of the government.
Mm.
The only thing all of these programs actually do is build bigger buildings, but it doesn't pull anyone out. It actually creates a barrier to stop you from getting out of poverty. And we have to fight against. I don't want to hear people discussed about whether electric charging stations are necessary or not.
Oh my goodness, don't get me started.
In a community that can't, number one, they can't afford the car. Because the median income for Black Americans, I need people to understand this. This is pre-tax. On a nationwide basis, is $48,000. That's approximately $3,500, maybe $3,500 most people are living on for the month. If you look at places like Detroit, it's $20,961. That means $1,700 is what people are living on.
Mm.
At the height of when gasoline was the most expensive, it was $5.20 a gallon. Imagine, think about, that's a lot of money if you got a 20-gallon tank, right?
Yes.
So you're spending over $100.
Yes.
And your paycheck is $400 pre-tax, right? $400 pre-tax, you're spending $100. So, and then that's not talking about food that's inflated. That's
right.
not talking about kids that might need clothes.
Right.
That's talking about medicine you need.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
You're talking about people that you've taken from hopelessness to total despair. One in 3 households struggle with their energy bills. That's according to the Energy Information Administration. The government said that. 1 in 5 is making a decision if they can eat, have food, or buy medicine for their kids.
It's like 1 out of the 3.
And for African Americans, it was double that. Double. So you're talking about the vast majority of African Americans every day making really life and death decisions because the cost of energy is so expensive.
Let me ask you something. Something that was put out in the press release about Dr. King for today's Martin Luther King Day, but it said Project 21 recently released a second edition of its blueprint for a better deal for Black America that contained 56 recommendations encompassing areas including criminal justice, education, healthcare, and election integrity. Can you share a little bit about the blueprint for a better deal for Black America with Project 21? And for the audience tuning in, whether it's here in North Carolina, upstate New York, or across the country, share a little bit about the forward thinking of the blueprint.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a copy right here.
Fabulous. That was well planned.
A lot of people complain and they talk about different areas. We identify multiple areas in there: criminal justice, education, critical race theory, and we give you the history of those, how it's affecting all of Americans, and then recommendations that any legislator can put into action immediately. One of our big areas, like energy and regulation. And I talked a little bit about, repealing there's different aspects. They want to make limits on gasoline, how much ethanol, things like that. We talk about healthcare, taxes and spending. And one of the things that we talk about is that Black Americans should be able to save money. You can't save money if you're low income and participate in any programs.
Exactly.
So a marriage penalty.
Yes.
You know that if Black Americans, 2 low income Americans, and there's always a synergy when you have a marriage and households are more stable. But if you have 2 low income individuals that don't make $1 more, their second income, if they get married, is taxed at 70%. 70. So what we have in our big government is
Mhm.
discouraging two-parent households. Because if I didn't make one penny, you got a husband and a wife married with the same income, and now that second income is 70%. 70% is gone. Why would I marry? And that's why you have so many single parent
Yes.
households.
Yes.
Identify that and say we should repeal the marriage penalty. And it's only low income people that are penalized.
Mm.
That's the reason why I say that they're building big government on the backs of low income individuals. That, the only people that really benefit, I say, is the Volvo class and the politicians who,
Right.
set up their nonprofits in the name of helping Black people,
Yeah.
but it never sees Black people.
Yeah. As they're
So,
smoking their stogies and drinking their gin.
yeah, yes. Every now and then they give a backpack out.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
Well,
to check the box,
yeah,
right?
and so I told them, like, we really don't need another government program. But
Yeah.
what we don't need is the government making more regulations that actually create a barrier so we can't bring ourselves out of poverty.
Right.
Because that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
The more regulations you add, the larger the burden is
Mhm.
on small and minority communities to be able to comply.
Mhm.
And we don't have the resources in our businesses to be able to deal with that. I mean, they're not, these paper exercise and paperwork, and then it's also this fear that people have, and then you end up having small businesses go out of business.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that's what we're saying. Don't repeal a lot of these regulations. Over regulations is always over regulations benefit big businesses.
Right. Right.
And majority of minority businesses are small business, 96%.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
what they're doing is making sure they destroy any they're making sure they destroy any ability of someone who wants to do better to do better.
Mhm.
And so that's the reason why we put a blueprint out for a better deal. They can't complain and say they don't know what they're asking us.
Sure, sure. But let me ask you this really quickly. This will be my last question before I let you go. But I could talk with you all day, and we could really do some damage. Let's shake it up and stir it.
Yeah.
But my question to you with the blueprint for a better deal for Black America is removing the federal government umbrella and taking it back to the states. Do you see states across the nation, more power back to the states, right? Do you
Yes.
see states across the nation that are really rising up to prevent some of the big government takeover where the Black communities do have the opportunity to grow? Because you mentioned New York, Chicago, Detroit, some of those cities that are just destructive. But are there states that stand out to you that are opportunities for Black businesses, Black entrepreneurship communities to grow and be removed out of that such low class lifestyle and be able to save again?
It's amazing, but the red states actually provide the best opportunities. Minorities actually thrive in red states because they don't have all the regulations, because they don't have this pretense of like California, where they'll bring multiple lawsuits against a building project actually to create artificial scarcity in the housing market so Black people can't move in,
Mm-hmm.
or segregated neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Places like Texas, places like Alabama, places like Florida.
Yeah.
Those are places where Black people are able to thrive. Even South Carolina is doing
Mm-hmm.
so much better.
Mm-hmm.
Black people might, when you hear Black people, and these are the activists that are complaining about blue states,
Yeah.
but if you look at what is happening, most minorities are moving to red states because that's where they have the best opportunity for upward mobility
And freedom.
and freedom. And
Yes.
so, a lot of these states, and any Black people do not believe in critical race theory. They don't want their kids to be told that, you know what, despite the fact that all the progress we've made, you have no chance of ever being anything, and that you need someone else's permission to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And they also realize that you have a state like California
Mm-hmm.
where they've put more money into education, but they're graduating people
Mm-hmm.
of color with a fourth grade reading level.
Oh,
70% of the African Americans and minorities are illiterate.
that sounds like Michigan too.
And Michigan is like that. Illinois is like that. They've actually, in Illinois, I talked to a bunch of teachers, not teachers, right?
Yeah.
That were not conservatives, liberals that actually are coming to me for help, where they've closed down all of these Black schools,
Mm-hmm.
and they reduced the number of African American teachers from 40% to 4%, and they prevented them, made it illegal for them to teach spelling or phonics, so that they actually had people come into the buildings and throw out all the books on reading, on teaching phonics, and they made it illegal for them to teach the kids how to
What
read.
did they do? Bring in a bunch of drag queens?
They
Like seriously?
They brought in all of these. She said all these guys that they had a police wagon outside. So if any teacher objected, that they were going to huddle, and then they had these guys go classroom to classroom, search through all their stuff, throw out any Dr. Seuss or any of these kind of phonic type books, any reading, any spelling, and prohibit them from teaching spelling and phonics. So are we surprised? We're graduating 70% of our classrooms that are illiterate.
Not surprised at all. It kind of reminds me of a contact of ours and a friend of mine in Rhode Island, a school teacher up there. She was basically put in teacher jail. And because she was fighting the CRT curriculum, and she was an English teacher, and she wanted to fight for her children and fight for the next generation to teach them, the important things like reading and writing. And you know what? How many know how to do cursive anymore? I mean, they know how to text on their phone and talk into their phone, but they don't know how to have a conversation and look straight in the eye and say, and hear the inflection in people's voices and see the expressions. They don't know how to do that anymore. But I could go on and rant for days.
They don't have any understanding of what they're reading.
No,
they're not even reading at a fourth grade reading level. I mean, they're not reading at a fourth grade reading level. But I say that this was intentional because that means you can't read contracts. Right. That means you don't understand property rights. And so then they can come in and basically take over your community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. On that note, we have gone over the time because this has been such a fascinating conversation with you and Barbara from Harlem. And man, I'm so grateful for you. I am so grateful for the power of your voice. And I can't wait to see you charge the hill yet again. Shake up, wake them up, wake that sleeping giant, because there is a ton of work that needs to be done. So Donna Jackson, the Director of Membership Development for Project 21 Black Leadership Network. What an honor. Many blessings to you, sister. I am so just amazed and in awe of you. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
I look forward to having you back, and we can have some more coffee and chat and take over the world and save it. How's that sound?
I'm 100% in.
All right, that sounds good. We'll drag Barbara in too, and her daughter Bibi. We'll make it happen. Yeah. So on that note, thank you so much for joining Common Sense America. I am Eden Hill. Until then, we'll see you later in the week, and have a blessed Martin Luther King Day. Be strong, be courageous, stand firm in your faith, and pray and keep praying. Until then, we'll see you then. Have a great day. Many blessings to you all.
Thank you.